I started smoking cigarettes in high school, and I continued to smoke as a light smoker through my travels. And when I went and traveled into the Rainbow Family and got involved in kind of like hippie type communities, cigarettes and smoking was a regular part of the social climate. And truth be told, I like smoking. I like the sensory experience. I like how grounded I feel. I like the feeling of a cigarette in my fingers and in my mouth. I love the feeling of I enjoy almost all of the aspects about smoking. But of course there's this abstract knowledge that smoking is bad for you. And so as much as we talk about our thoughts creating our reality, you imagine that if there's this thought form in our mind every time you go to light a cigarette or every time you go to take a puff on a cigarette, it's like, oh, this is so bad for me. Oh, this is going to kill me one day. Well, that thought form is like an actual spell that we are like speaking over ourselves. And I started to recognize it and become aware of it once I was on this journey of starting to become aware of my thoughts. Once I had accepted that my thoughts actually did contribute to the reality that I was experiencing. And I made a deal with myself that I was not going to shame myself or feel guilty when I did choose to smoke a cigarette. And so that was step one of the process of quitting. It started with not making myself feel guilty or ashamed of what I was doing. I wanted to smoke a cigarette. I was doing so in a consensual experience as an adult, knowing the risks, and I did. And so over time, as I got a little bit older, I started to feel the difference, the effect that it was having on me. I think it's really different to smoke a cigarette when you're, in your early 20s than it is to be smoking a cigarette in your mid 30s, as an example. And eventually I became a mother and then a single mother. And then I got a live-in job at an assisted living facility. And the first woman that I ever found who had passed away in her bed had basically suffocated to death as a result of her cigarette smoking addiction. She had been a lifelong smoker, and she was one of the classic women that's out there in her wheelchair on oxygen smoking cigarettes, and was pretty, by the time you're diagnosed with something like emphysema, I think you're pretty fully committed to like, well, I've made it this far and I just want to enjoy my life. And she passed away. And I started to see that the people that were very sick in younger years, so younger in terms of senior citizens, so 50s and 60s, I think those are pretty young years to be passing away. And I watched people pass away that young, and I was watching people in their 90s who had never smoked cigarettes, and I recognized that there was a compelling difference. And I knew that it was going to be best for me to quit smoking. And especially as a mom, once you have a kid, things get motivating a little bit differently, a lot a bit differently. And probably like there's a primal evolutionary reason for that. But I decided I wanted to quit, but I also loved smoking. And so I got myself to the point where instead, I made myself this promise. I was not going to guilt myself. I was not going to shame myself. If I chose to smoke a cigarette, I was going to enjoy it. And so I was able to reduce down over time. And so the first method was that I realized that once I smoked that first cigarette of the day, then I would want to keep smoking, because you kind of like get that biological cue. Once that first nicotine goes in, then you want to keep having it. And so I started by, when I would wake up in the morning, I would postpone how long I would wait before having my first cigarette. And again, I was a live-in I was a live-in employee at this assisted living facility, and so there were a number of smokers, and so it's a very social thing too. It's not just a physiological thing. There's a social component to being a cigarette smoker. And, you know, people are out there first thing in the morning before breakfast puffing on those cigarettes. And so I would wait, and okay, instead of going out before breakfast, you know what, I'm gonna smoke my first cigarette after breakfast. And eventually over time, I would push back how long I could wait before smoking the first cigarette. And I realized, like, oh my God, it's noontime and I haven't smoked a cigarette. That's amazing. And then eventually, you know, it was normal for me to wait until noontime before smoking my first cigarette. And then eventually I was able to get to the point where it'd be noontime and I would push myself, like, you know, oh, I can wait a little longer. And it got to the point where eventually it was after dinner and I'm smoking my first cigarette. And after a couple of months of that, it got to the point where routinely I would be able to wait until the end of the day to smoke my first cigarette. And so I was down to about 1 cigarette a day. And also I was getting in the habit of, instead of smoking a whole cigarette, I would smoke a half a cigarette. So I was able to, that was really great progress, right? And I had people who were cigarette smokers tell me, like, if you can get down to 1 cigarette a day, actually that's not going to impact your health quite as much. And so I was really proud of myself for that. Instead of feeling guilt or shame every time I would light up, oh, this is going to kill me, instead it was like, oh God, I really enjoy smoking, but I know that this is not, you know, conducive for my long-term health. And so I want to, you know, be healthy. I want to be making these better choices and using thought forms that were going to be more constructive. And eventually I got to the point where I would even forget to smoke a cigarette at the end of the evening because I was busy or working or whatever. And so I decided that I was going to give myself a cigarette budget of 5 cigarettes a week. And so I could smoke them kind of however I wanted to. And so I was able to reduce the number of evenings I was smoking cigarettes. And eventually it got to the point where I was able to go 4 or 5 days without smoking a cigarette. And then on the weekends, I remember in particular one weekend, my daughter was with her father. I had the rare weekend off because I worked overnights at this facility and I was thrilled to pieces. I walked down the street to go like sing karaoke or do something. And I was like, well, I haven't smoked cigarettes all week. So I had decided, okay, I can smoke on the weekends. And when I smoke on the weekends, if I have a drink, you know, sometimes it's nice to have a cigarette with a drink. Not that I actually don't drink much anymore, but this was a number of years ago. Then I would allow myself to smoke for, okay, on the weekend I can smoke cigarettes. You know, if I want to smoke 2 or 3 cigarettes in one night, fine. And it got to the point where, the other caveat is, so I wasn't guilting or shaming myself, but I was bringing myself to full presence and awareness when I would choose to smoke. So while I was tapering down, I was also bringing myself to presence and awareness. How am I feeling at the time that I have the thought, ooh, I really want a cigarette right now? What is my mind feeling? What are my emotions feeling? What is my body feeling? And then when I go and smoke the cigarette, when I light it up, how do I feel? And then after smoking the cigarette, how did that make me feel? And so I was starting to recognize, especially as I would go a number of days without smoking and then smoke maybe even 2 or 3 cigarettes on a weekend, that I would wake up the next day feeling like crap. I mean, really feeling awful, just like, it was hard to breathe. I was like noticing. And so I really started to recognize the effect that it was having on my body. And so over time, I was eventually able to get to the point where I was not smoking. I was not buying cigarettes at all. And so then if I went out, maybe I could share a little bit of someone else's cigarette. And so now I'm at the point where if I'm sitting with a friend and they're smoking a cigarette and, you know, I can take 2 or 3 puffs. 3 puffs is my limit. I have a 3 puff rule. I'll do 3 puffs, there's a feeling that I feel in my body. There's kind of a grounded feeling that happens. There's a little bit of a shift energetically, and then I pass that cigarette back and I don't have the compulsion for any more. And 3 puffs every once in a while, like once a month or something, I feel is a pretty low risk in terms of long-term health damage. But it's been years. It's been over, let's see, probably 7 years since I've quit smoking. And I hardly think about it. Although when I watch a movie where a character is smoking cigarettes all throughout the movie, I do have like this urge of like, I really want a cigarette right now. It's really quite interesting. But managing those urges is part of life, right? We manage our behaviors and their risks and effects and consequences, and that's just part of accepting responsibility for the experience and the health that we have. Fascinating though, now those of you that have seen any of my more recent videos know that I am at this point where I am really cleaning up my diet, and I used to actually be really pure in the food that I ate at a certain point. Moved to the city and all these little things sneak in, or I'm popping over, grabbing a quick lunch here, grabbing a quick lunch there, and I don't really I haven't really been giving enough thought to the ingredients in the food. I think, a little bit here or there isn't going to really make a difference. But I have been starting to recognize over the past couple years that there is a compulsive and addictive quality to the way that I eat sugar. And so I've been working towards eliminating sugar and or at least really drastically reducing refined and processed sugar. I personally think it's fine to eat honey or agave or any other forms of sugar. But why? How is it that quitting cigarettes has been more successful for me than quitting sugar? And part of it comes from this recent knowledge that I have had that food scientists design a lot of these ultra processed foods that we are eating to be addictive. And I have heard that sugar activates the same parts in the brain that drugs do, that other drugs do. So sugar is definitely a drug. But also it's like one of the things that our body needs for energy. And so again, I have been bringing myself back to remembering how I was able to quit smoking cigarettes and how it was about not guilting and not shaming myself. And it's been a process of, I kind of like have these cycles where I do really well and I eat really clean for a while, and then I kind of fall off the wagon. And once I eat that first piece of junk food, then, for days and days, there's just this kind of compulsive, addictive kind of craving that I give into when it comes to sugar and ultra processed foods. And I have been noticing, the other day I had a piece of pizza, and within 15 minutes, I felt it. My cheeks were flush. I was hot. I got a little bit of a headache. I mean, I've been studying things like insulin resistance, and I'm starting to recognize that these are the beginnings of risk factors for me, that I know that if I don't really shift something for myself, I could have some actual pretty intense long-term physical health consequences. And I don't want that. I want to live a happy, healthy life. My husband is younger than me. I have a daughter that I'm raising. I don't want to have a chronic illness that could have been avoided because I could have changed a habit. And also, I'm not going to make myself guilty if I want to eat a piece of pizza or if I want to have a cupcake with some frosting on it, around the time of my birthday. And so how do I navigate this for myself? And, I love food. I love it. I love cooking. So that helps because I'm in the process of discovering different substitutions and things like that. But It's a process. So it's the same process. What is the thought that originates the action when I'm like, ooh, God, maybe I'm gonna go have a cupcake, and oh, let me go find this, and then how do I feel when I'm eating it, and then how do I feel afterwards, and was it worth it? And I just don't believe that guilt and fear are sufficient motivators. So the fear of death isn't going to stop me from wanting to eat ultra processed food, and neither is feeling guilty or shaming about it. And at the same time, there's something deeper where it's like a knowledge and understanding and awareness. I've been learning, like, statistically, that actually ultra processed food and sugar can actually have greater health consequences in the long term than smoking cigarettes. I'm not advocating that smoking cigarettes is healthy, but I'm also not going to sit here and justify the ultra processed foods when I do choose to eat them. But you know what? If I want it, I'm going to eat it, and I'm going to try not to feel guilty about it. But it's getting to the point where I'm doing it so infrequently that it doesn't benefit. Like, I feel just like with the cigarettes, where I would wait until the weekends to smoke, and then I wake up the next day and I'm like, oh my God, I feel like crap. Well, that's happening now with the food. And one of the things I think about is how I have friends and I know people in my life where that is the majority of the food that they eat, and it's the majority of the food that their children eat. And I have no judgment about it. I mean, this is really the thing that I'm really trying to drive home, because I feel like so many health people, they put out this information and they really make normal working families who are just doing their best to, like, go to work, get home, feed their kids, and have something to eat, and all within something that they can afford, that, I am not sitting here judging or putting shame on it, because it's like, good for you for feeding your family. And I don't think that people should feel guilty about that. I think people should actually really honor themselves and the service that they're doing to their family by preparing food and by putting love into it. And I really do think that, like, there is something to be said for this idea that, we can bless the food and fill it with love and gratitude. And as we're, eating with love and gratitude, that it can kind of mitigate things. But I think once we start to come into awareness, once we start to get to a point where we realize that we want to make changes, just know that it's possible. And that's the reason that I am making these videos, is for people that don't quite know where to begin. They know they want to make some changes. They know that there's better alternatives out there, but all they've ever known is how to eat a certain way, because that's all we were ever taught. I was raised on processed foods. I mean, my mom's idea of dinner was filling the freezer with Tina's burritos, banquet pot pies, cans of SpaghettiOs with meatballs because they have more protein, and the frozen dinners with the turkey and the stuffing and the gravy and the little thing of, like, cranberry sauce that smelled like I don't even know what. And I would sit there in front of the TV every single night after school and eat that and watch The Simpsons and Knight Rider. Not Blossom, though. That came on after. I wasn't allowed to watch that because apparently my parents thought that was inappropriate. But I don't know how Simpsons got through. But I'm glad they let me watch it because I loved it. But the point is, please don't feel guilty or ashamed, but do know that it is possible to affordably feed a family without having to resort to those foods. But I also understand time is a huge factor. Sometimes as a business owner, especially if I have an employee that quits or calls out and I'm getting home so late, and it's all we can do to just, warm something up and eat because I'm just so exhausted. I don't even have the energy for things. I've been able to start learning how to make some different habits, and that's been really helpful. So the Instant Pot is my friend when I don't know what to do and all I want to do is just stop and pick up fast food on the way home. I try to think like, okay, maybe I can make some rice in the Instant Pot. Okay, what do I have that can go with rice? And what's so fantastic is that with rice bowls, you can kind of put anything on top. And so we've been having fun with that. And there's other creative things. And I do have a channel where I really love to cook, so I do want to start making more cooking videos. I want to figure out how to like attach a camera so that it can just sort of like be seeing what I see when I'm cooking and preparing food, because I just get so much joy out of it when I'm not so exhausted that all I want to do is collapse and fall asleep. And yeah, so on the other hand, my husband has been a cigarette smoker, and I prepare healthy meals at home, but there's still ways that processed food sneaks its way into our world, especially around lunchtime and snacks and things. But he was the guy that was smoking cigarettes, and he would stop and get Wendy's on the way home every day, and he read a book. He read a book called Good Energy by Casey Means, and it changed his life, and he quit smoking cigarettes and he quit eating ultra processed food overnight. Now, of course, we live in the real world, and so it's not practical to just never eat a piece of pizza. It's not practical to say, well, I'm never going to eat a piece of cake ever again in my life. Or those little pastries from Costco that have the almond, just, oh God, they're so good. Right? The addiction. But also there's joy. And so how do we find that balance? And that's the process. Because I'm not interested in guilt. I'm not interested in shaming myself. But I am interested in being as healthy as I can be. And if I can start to recognize, like, I don't know. I'm actually not quite sure what the answer was, but I really wanted to make this video to share with you about how I quit smoking, and also to share that that is the same method that I am currently using to help reduce the intake of the ultra processed food. And in terms of like being exhausted and just picking up food on the way home just to feed the family, it's getting to the point where it is so expensive. Even just like Chipotle or Qdoba or whatever, it's $50-$60 for 3 of us. And at that point, it would just make more sense to, if I'm really just feeling like I need to pick something up and bring it home, then I've started to get to the point where I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to like go to the grocery store and grab a meal that I can warm up. And so that, and there are, if you read the ingredient labels, there are sometimes in an aisle you'll see 2 things, and you read the ingredients, and one is a lot higher quality ingredients than the other. So I think there are ways to be creative, to have healthier alternatives, and then I'm just saving the money for eating out for when it's like actually a time when I can enjoy it and make an occasion out of it and really celebrate whatever it is. Oh, it's Friday, or it's my birthday, or whatever the case may be. So, what kind of person are you? I had a comment in one of my previous videos where my friend commented that he has some pretty severe medical health factors that it's no question for him. He's able to really just eat really clean. And that is where I would like to be. And I don't think it's a matter of self-control so much as it is a matter of really, for me, this is just how my process is, of really understanding why am I wanting the thing? This thing is designed to be addictive, like those pastries from Costco that I'm right now, as I'm making this video, thinking about sitting on my counter in the kitchen right now, and I want to just go and eat it. And so, yeah, probably not a good idea to even have it in the house. And so that's been a process too. And I am going to make videos sharing the process of how I was able to eliminate all of these ultra processed foods from my life. Previously, when I had gone about 5 years eating really clean, I was kind of homesteading and living off grid, and we really got to a point where I was cooking everything from scratch. But I was also living in the country, and so it was really easy. When town is 45 minutes away and you don't buy something at the grocery store, you don't bring it into the house, you can't just like have it at your doorstep at 10 o'clock at night when you want something. But here in the city, it's like, so I can just like push some buttons on my phone and pizza can show up at midnight, or I just hop in my car and go a block and go get myself some ice cream. And so it becomes like a different process for myself when my brain is going, God, I really want to go get some ice cream right now. Cause that was my routine for oftentimes have some ice cream at night. Like, like a lot of people do it. I love ice cream. And then I started to substitute that with like full fat yogurt with jam or jelly that I had made, which actually is fantastic. I also indulged in a Ninja Creamy, which has been great, but you don't need a Ninja Creamy in order to substitute an ice cream habit. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Okay, bye.